Do you speak English properly, or do I need to repeat myself slowly? The CEO's voice echoed through the car with a disdain that cut through the air like a blade. Richard Montgomery adjusted his Italian tie as he looked in the rearview mirror with that cruel smile that privileged people reserve for those they consider inferior. Camila Santos, 34, kept her eyes fixed on the busy Manhattan road. 3 years of driving for apps after losing her job at the Brazilian consulate. 3 years of hearing comments like that. But today something was different. Today, the man in the back seat had just called someone talking about a complete disaster in an international negotiation that could cost his company $500 million. Just look where we're going, Richard continued, talking on the phone with his partner. I hired how can I put it, a very typical Uber person to take me to the airport. I bet they don't even know where the international terminal is. Camila took a deep breath. For years as an official UN interpreter, she had mediated conflicts between nations. She spoke 9 languages fluently and had a master's degree in international relations from Harvard. But since the economic crisis closed the consulate where she worked, her life had been reduced to listening to insults from people who had no idea who she really was. The flight to Tokyo leaves in 2 hours, Richard yelled on the phone, and our damn interpreter cancelled at the last minute. How are we going to close the deal with the Japanese without anyone who speaks their language? This meeting is worth $500 million. The irony of the situation did not escape Camila. For 15 minutes, she listened to Richard describe in detail the collapse of his business merger, a deal that depended entirely on accurate cross-cultural communication with Japanese, Chinese, and Korean executives. My God, Richard muttered, running his hand through his gray hair. 3 years preparing for this merger, and now it's all going down the drain because we can't find a decent translator in this huge city. Camila watched in the rearview mirror as Richard frantically typed on his cell phone, probably looking for last-minute interpretation services. His desperation grew with each rejected call, with each impossible with this deadline he received in response. It was then that Richard did something that sealed his fate. Noticing Camila watching him in the rearview mirror, he covered the phone and said with a condescending smile, "Sorry for the noise, honey. I know people like you don't understand much about international business, but I'm a little stressed today." People like you. The words echoed in the silence that followed. Camila felt something familiar ignite inside her, the same icy calm that had helped her mediate diplomatic crises between countries at war. At that moment, Richard Montgomery had no idea that the typical Uber driver sitting in front of him had spent the last decade of her life saving international negotiations far more complex than his. He didn't know that she had direct contacts with the same Japanese executives he was desperately trying to meet with. And he definitely didn't know that his arrogance had just awakened something in Camila that would turn that routine trip into the most humiliating experience of his business life. As New York traffic moved slowly around them, a silent revenge began to take shape in the mind of a woman whom everyone underestimated, but who would soon prove that true power has no color, gender, or uniform, and that sometimes salvation comes from where we least expect it. If you're enjoying this story of justice and reversal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what will happen in the next few minutes will show how a single prejudice decision can completely change the course of a life. Manhattan traffic crawled like molasses, and Richard's despair grew with every minute lost. His calls multiplied, each more frustrating than the last. $15,000 for 3 hours? Are you crazy? He yelled into the phone, while Camila watched discreetly in the rearview mirror. Listen, honey, Richard said, covering the phone and addressing her in that patronizing tone that privileged people use when they want to sound nice. Do you know anyone who speaks Japanese? Maybe someone you know in your community. Camila almost smiled. Her community. If only he knew that for 8 years she had been Brazil's official voice at the United Nations, translating in real time for presidents and prime ministers. That her apartment in Ipanema, sold to pay for the move to the United States, was worth more than the luxury car Richard was sitting in. I don't know anyone, sir, she replied, maintaining the respectful tone she had perfected over the last 3 years of daily humiliation. Richard returned to his desperate calls. What do you mean all the lines are busy? This is New York, for God's sake. There must be 1,000 people who speak Japanese in this city. What Richard didn't know was that Camila personally knew 3 of the Japanese executives he would be trying to meet at the airport. Hiroaki Tanaka, director of Matsumoto Industries, had been her translation partner during the 2019 trade negotiations. She still had his direct number saved on her phone. My company will go bankrupt if I can't close this merger, Richard muttered into the phone, his voice beginning to crack. 3 years of negotiations, $500 million, and all because I can't find a damn translator. Camila remembered the last conversation she had had with her daughter, Isabella, a medical student in Sao Paulo. Mom, when are you going to stop driving for horrible people and go back to your real job? The question echoed in her mind every night. Real job. As if translating agreements that affected millions of lives were less important than any American corporate position. You know what's most ironic? Richard continued talking on the phone, now with his partner. We're here in the largest immigrant city in the world, and I can't find anyone qualified for a simple translation. It's as if all these people came here just to drive Uber and deliver food. The phrase cut through the air like a knife. Camila felt something familiar ignite inside her, the same calculating coldness that had made her the most sought-after interpreter on the international diplomatic circuit. The difference was that now, for the first time in 3 years, she had a golden opportunity in her hands. Richard checked the time obsessively. 1 hour and 40 minutes until the flight. If I miss this meeting, Tanaka Corporation will sign with our competitors in Germany. He ran his hand through his hair, completely desperate. 20 years building this company, and it's all going down the drain because of a language barrier. It was then that Richard did something that would seal his fate. Realizing they had arrived at the airport, he threw a $20 bill on the front seat without even looking at Camila. Keep the change, dear. Buy yourself something nice. The ride cost $85. Camila took the bill silently, folding it with the same precision with which she used to organize official UN documents. Richard was already getting out of the car, pulling his Italian leather suitcase, when his phone rang again. Richard Montgomery, he answered as he walked toward the terminal. What do you mean, they canceled too? But you confirmed yesterday. His voice rose an octave. No, I can't reschedule. The Japanese are flying back to Tokyo tomorrow morning. Camila got out of the car and walked calmly to the sidewalk where Richard was gesturing frantically, trying to solve the impossible. 3 years of listening to his phone conversations had taught her exactly how Montgomery Enterprises' business worked, and more importantly, how it was about to collapse. Mr. Montgomery, she said softly, approaching with measured steps. Richard turned, irritated at being interrupted by the driver. I already told you, you can keep the change. No need to thank me. Actually, Camila continued, her posture changing subtly, shoulders straighter, chin slightly raised, the commanding presence that had intimidated diplomats in Geneva. I wanted to know if you still need that interpreter. Richard blinked, confused. Excuse me. Japanese, Chinese, and Korean, she said calmly. That's what I heard you mention on the phone. For a moment, Richard was silent, processing the words. Then, as if the idea were too absurd to be taken seriously, he laughed. Oh, how sweet. You want to help me? Look, dear, that's very kind of you, but I need a professional. Someone with credentials, international experience, you understand. Camila nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible smile forming at the corner of her mouth. I understand perfectly, Mr. Montgomery. Richard was already walking away when she added, almost as a casual afterthought, it's a shame you'll miss the meeting with Tanaka-san. He's so particular about Japanese cultural protocols. One small slip in etiquette and, she made a subtle gesture with her hand, sayonara, 500 million. Richard stopped walking. Every insult, every condescending treatment, every look of contempt over the last 3 years had fueled a silent determination that now pulsed through his veins. And as Richard Montgomery stood motionless on the airport sidewalk, finally beginning to question his own certainties, Camila knew that the game had only just begun, and that this time, she would dictate all the rules. Richard turned slowly, his face a mixture of confusion and growing irritation. You speak Japanese? The question came out as if he were asking if she flew or performed magic. Among other things, Camila replied calmly, watching the internal struggle reflected on his face. It was almost comical to see a man so accustomed to controlling everything discover that he might need to acknowledge the humanity of someone he had treated like furniture for years. Look, honey, Richard began, using that patronizing tone that privileged people reserve for impossible situations. It's very sweet of you to want to help, but this is a $500 million negotiation. It's not a casual conversation at the Japanese restaurant around the corner. Camila nodded patiently. You're right. Negotiations of this magnitude require someone familiar with the specific protocols of the Japanese keiretsu, especially when it comes to mergers involving proprietary technology and patent transfers. Richard's jaw twitched slightly. Those weren't words a simple driver should know. Tanaka-san will probably start with the Meishokokan ritual, Camila continued, noticing how Richard's eyes widened with each technical term. Exchanging business cards with specific protocol. Receiving with both hands, bowing exactly 15 degrees, reading the card respectfully before putting it away. One mistake there and you lose credibility before you even sit down at the table. How do you know that? Richard stammered, his arrogance beginning to crack like old paint. Just then, Camila's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and smiled subtly. "Excuse me, Mr. Montgomery. I need to take this." Camila. What an incredible coincidence. The excited voice on the other end spoke English with an unmistakable Japanese accent. "I was thinking about you just yesterday. How are things in New York?" "Very well, Tanaka-san," Camila replied, switching naturally to Japanese. "Actually, what a coincidence indeed. I'm at JFK Airport right now." Richard froze. Literally froze, as if someone had pressed the pause button on his reality. "You're kidding." Tanaka exclaimed, switching back to English out of politeness. "I'm also going to JFK. Important business meeting tomorrow with a company called Montgomery Enterprises. Do you know them?" Camila looked directly at Richard, who had visibly paled. "Interesting that you mention that, Tanaka-san. I happen to be here with the CEO of Montgomery Enterprises at this very moment." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Richard seemed to be processing a reality that challenged everything he believed about social hierarchies and human value. "Camila-san, you can't be serious." Tanaka laughed on the other end of the line. "Mr. Montgomery is there? What a small world. Can you introduce us?" "Of course," Camila said, handing the phone to Richard as naturally as one would offer a glass of water. "Tanaka-san would like to say hello." Richard took the phone with trembling hands. "Hello. Montgomery-san. What an unexpected pleasure." Tanaka's warm voice echoed through the receiver. "Camila-san is a dear old friend. We worked together on several international negotiations when she was at the UN. One of the best interpreters I've ever met." Richard's world collapsed with the force of a tsunami. UN. Professional interpreter. Old friend of the Japanese executive he was desperate to impress. She worked at the UN? Richard managed to murmur. "For over 10 years. Camila-san has mediated some of the most complex trade agreements between our countries. If she's offering to help with our meeting, Montgomery-san, consider yourself the luckiest man in New York." Camila took the phone back. "Tanaka-san, Mr. Montgomery is having some difficulties with interpretation for tomorrow's meeting. Perhaps we can resolve this in person." "Perfect. I'll be at Gate 23 in 15 minutes. See you soon, Camila-san." When the call ended, the silence between them was deafening. Richard stared at Camila as if he were seeing a ghost or a mirage. You really worked at the UN," he said, not as a question, but as a shocked statement. "For 12 years, Camila confirmed. "Official interpreter for trade negotiations, international conflict mediation, and diplomatic summits. Harvard, Georgetown, fluent in 9 languages." Richard ran his hand through his hair, his mind clearly trying to reorganize information that challenged 3 years of ingrained prejudices. But you were driving my Uber." "I still am," Camila said simply. "Economic crises don't ask about degrees before destroying careers. Medical bills don't care how many presidents you've translated for." Reality was hitting Richard like consecutive waves. Each word revealed layers of prejudice he had built up about a woman he knew only for her current economic need, never for her true ability. "Camila," he said, his voice breaking slightly, I need your help." "I know," she replied calmly. "The question is, are you prepared to treat that help with the respect it deserves?" Richard looked around, the busy airport, his flight leaving in an hour, 3 years of negotiations hanging by a thread, and the woman he had humiliated for years being his only salvation. "How much?" he asked, resigned. "It's not about money, Mr. Montgomery," Camila said. her voice carrying an authority he had never heard before. It's about recognition. About understanding that talent doesn't wear a uniform and that dignity isn't defined by salary. She picked up her bag and started walking toward the terminal. Tanaka-san is waiting at gate 23. You can come with me and take advantage of the opportunity to save your company, or you can continue looking for someone who seems more suited to your aesthetic standards. Richard followed her, his steps initially hesitant, then more determined. With every meter he walked, he realized that he wasn't just following his former driver, he was following the person who could completely rewrite the future of his company. As they walked through the airport corridors, Camila discreetly sent a text message to her former supervisor at the UN. I need an urgent favor. Accreditation documents for presentation today. It's important. The reply came within seconds, already sent to your email. Good luck, Camila. We miss you here. Richard didn't see the smile that formed on Camila's face. He was too focused on processing how he had spent 3 years sitting in the back seat of the car of one of the most respected diplomats in the Western Hemisphere, treating her as if she were invisible. What he couldn't imagine was that Camila had spent those same 3 years not only listening to his business conversations, but studying every flaw, every weakness, every vulnerable point in his company. And now, when he needed her most, she held all the cards. As they approached the gate where Tanaka was waiting for them, Richard had no idea that he was walking not only into a business meeting, but into a demonstration of power that would forever change his understanding of who really controlled that situation, and who had always controlled it, even when he thought he was in charge. At gate 23, Hiroaki Tanaka waited with 2 other Japanese executives, all wearing impeccable suits and carrying leather briefcases. When they saw Camila approaching, their faces lit up with genuine and warm recognition. Camila-san. Tanaka exclaimed, bowing respectfully. What an unexpected pleasure. He addressed her in fluent Japanese. You are even more elegant than the last time we met in Geneva. The pleasure is all mine, Tanaka-san, Camila replied in the same language, returning the bow with perfect cultural precision. May I introduce Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Enterprises. Richard nervously extended his hand, but Tanaka greeted him with a slight formal bow, studying him with experienced eyes. Montgomery-san, it's an honor. Anyone close to Camila-san deserves our utmost respect. The pleasure is mine, Richard stammered, clearly out of his comfort zone. Tanaka turned to Camila, continuing in Japanese, I must admit, I'm curious about how you two met. The last I heard from you, you were considering that offer from the Swiss embassy. Life's circumstances bring us together in unexpected ways, Camila replied diplomatically, also in Japanese. Mr. Montgomery has some interesting challenges that I thought you might like to hear about. Richard stood there, completely lost in the conversation, until Tanaka addressed him in English. Montgomery-san, Camila-san told me that you need assistance with cultural protocols for our meeting. May I ask what exactly the nature of the problem is? Well, Richard began hesitantly, our interpreter cancelled and... He stopped, realizing he was about to admit his own incompetence in front of one of Asia's most influential executives. Actually, Camila interjected gently, Mr. Montgomery was concerned about ensuring that all cultural aspects of the negotiation were treated with the proper respect. He specifically requested my services to ensure there were no misunderstandings. Tanaka smiled, clearly impressed. What admirable consideration, Montgomery-san. It is rare to find American executives who understand the importance of cultural protocols. Richard nodded quickly, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. He hadn't requested anything. He was being saved by a woman he had humiliated for 3 years. Camila-san, said one of the other Japanese executives, approaching, allow me to introduce Kim Jun-ho, our Korean partner, and Li Wei, representing our Chinese interests. Camila greeted each of them in the appropriate language. To Kim, she spoke Korean, it's an honor to meet you, Kim-san. I hope your trip was comfortable. To Li, she switched to Mandarin, Li-san, I've heard a lot about your successes in expanding into Western markets. Richard watched, open-mouthed, as Camila conducted fluent conversations in 4 different languages, demonstrating not only linguistic competence but intimate knowledge of each executive's business. Montgomery-san, Tanaka finally said, you are extraordinarily lucky to have Camila-san on your team. She is legendary in our circles. Legendary. Richard repeated, his voice almost a whisper. Oh yes, Li Wei agreed in English with a Chinese accent. Camila brokered the 2019 Sino-Brazilian trade agreement. She saved $3 billion in negotiations when all seemed lost. Kim Jun-ho added, and the protocol she developed for Asian American technology mergers is still the industry standard. Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The woman he had treated as a domestic helper for 3 years was a revered figure on the international business scene. Camila-san, Tanaka continued, I need to ask, are you officially working with Montgomery Enterprises now? Because if you're considering a career change, I have 3 different offers for you. Camila smiled subtly. Actually, Tanaka-san, my situation with Montgomery Enterprises is in transition. Richard stared at her, finally realizing that he had completely lost control of the situation. Just then, Camila's phone rang. Excuse me, she said, checking the screen. It's the UN. I need to take this. Camila, it's so good to hear your voice. The voice on the other end was on speaker, in English. Your accreditation documents are attached to the email. The Secretary General wants you to know that the door is always open for your return. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I may need that sooner than I thought. When she hung up, Tanaka was looking at her with renewed interest. Camila-san, are you considering returning to the United Nations? I'm evaluating several options, she replied diplomatically. Richard finally found his voice desperate. Camila, about our meeting tomorrow. What meeting? She asked calmly. The merger. The $500 million deal. You said you would help me. Camila studied him for a long moment. Mr. Montgomery, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I offered professional assistance, but you made it clear that you needed someone with international credentials and experience. Someone who seemed to fit your standards. Richard's blood ran cold as his own words echoed back to him. Fortunately, Camila continued, Tanaka-san has just offered me 3 different positions, and Dr. Hassan has confirmed that I can return to the UN at any time. No, wait, Richard stammered, panic rising in his voice. I didn't mean. I was under pressure. Tanaka frowned, watching the exchange with growing confusion. Montgomery-san, is there a problem? Camila addressed the Asian executives. Gentlemen, it has been wonderful to see you again. Unfortunately, I have some urgent professional matters to attend to. Of course, Tanaka said, still watching Richard suspiciously. But Camila-san, our offer remains open. Director of International Cultural Relations, starting salary of $300,000, based in Tokyo or Singapore. That's very generous, Tanaka-san. I'll give it serious consideration. Richard watched in horror as his only salvation received job offers that paid more than the salaries of most of his own executives. Camila, he pleaded as the Asian executives discreetly walked away, I was wrong. Completely wrong. Please help me save my company. Mr. Montgomery, she said calmly, for 3 years you treated me as if I were invisible. You paid me a pittance to drive your car while listening to your most confidential conversations. You humiliated me, insulted me, and this morning you called me typical, and said that people like me don't understand business. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. What you didn't know, Camila continued, her voice gaining authority, is that during those 3 years, I documented every call you made, every deal you discussed, every strategic decision you made in my car. Richard's face paled. What do you mean? Camila showed him her phone. Recordings. Hundreds of hours. Including conversations about questionable accounting practices, bribes to public officials, and systematic discrimination against minority employees. That's illegal. Richard stammered. New York is a one-party consent state for recordings, Camila said calmly. Perfectly legal. And as a former UN employee, I have contacts at several federal agencies who would be very interested in this material. Richard felt his legs buckle. What do you want? Justice, she said simply. And a lesson you clearly never learned about treating people with dignity. At that moment, Richard Montgomery realized he had underestimated not only Camila's intelligence, but also her patience and planning. The woman he had seen as a mere service provider had collected enough evidence to destroy not only his merger, but his entire company. As Camila walked calmly toward the exit, leaving Richard paralyzed in the middle of the world's busiest airport, she knew that the real lesson was just beginning. The humiliation he would feel in the coming days would be nothing compared to the weight of discovering that his prejudice had cost him not only $500 million, but also his reputation, his company, and possibly his freedom. But what Richard didn't know yet was that Camilla had one last surprise in store for him, one that would turn his apparent victory into something far more devastating than he could have imagined. A week later, Richard Montgomery's life had turned into a series of waking nightmares. The recordings Camilla handed over to federal authorities sparked an investigation that exposed 15 years of systematic corruption at Montgomery Enterprises. The FBI raided his offices one Tuesday morning. Richard watched from the window of his apartment as boxes of documents were loaded onto federal trucks, knowing that each one contained evidence of crimes he thought he had buried forever. Camilla, meanwhile, sat in her new office on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, now as Director of International Cultural Relations for Tanaka Global Holdings. Her salary of $350,000 a year was just the beginning. The company had created an entire division under her leadership. "Camilla-san," Tanaka said during a video conference with executives in Tokyo, "your cultural mediation strategy has resulted in 3 new mergers this month. You have completely transformed our approach to Western markets." Across town, Richard received a call from his lawyer. "The federal charges have been formally filed. Tax evasion, bribery, workplace discrimination. We're talking 20 to 30 years in prison, Richard." The final twist came when Camilla decided to use her influence for something bigger. She created the Invisible Talents Foundation, funded by her new Asian employers, dedicated to identifying highly skilled professionals working in survival jobs. Within 6 months, the foundation had connected 200 underemployed immigrants and minorities to executive positions at partner companies. Doctors driving taxis returned to hospitals. Engineers delivering food returned to laboratories. Lawyers cleaning offices took over legal departments. Richard lost everything. His company was sold for a fraction of its value to cover federal fines. His reputation was destroyed. His wife filed for divorce when she found out about the bribes. He now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, working as a junior consultant for a small accounting firm. The final reunion happened by chance, 6 months later, at the same airport where it all began. Richard was waiting for an economy flight to Detroit, wearing a cheap suit, carrying a suitcase with broken wheels. Camilla walked past him accompanied by a delegation of Japanese executives, all speaking Japanese as they walked toward first class. She saw him and stopped. "Mr. Montgomery," she said calmly. Richard looked up, recognizing her immediately. "Camilla," he murmured, unable to hide his embarrassment. "How are things?" she asked, without malice in her voice. "Surviving," he replied honestly. Camilla studied his face for a moment, seeing no longer the arrogant man from months ago, but someone finally confronted with the consequences of his choices. "Mr. Montgomery," she said softly, "I hope you've learned that dignity isn't for sale and talent has no color, gender, or accent." Richard nodded, unable to speak. "If you ever want a real second chance," Camilla continued, "my foundation has a professional rehabilitation program. We teach people who have lost everything to rebuild their lives based on respect and merit." She held out a business card. Richard accepted it with trembling hands. As Camilla walked away with her delegation, Richard looked at the card. On the back was a phrase in Portuguese: "The best revenge is to become what your enemies never imagined you could be." Today, Camila Santos is internationally recognized as one of the world's most respected cultural mediators. Her story has inspired thousands of people to never give up on their dreams, regardless of their circumstances. And Richard? After 2 years in the Foundation's rehabilitation program, he now works as a social worker, helping people in vulnerable situations find work. He has never forgotten the lesson that a simple Uber driver taught him about humanity. Life has an interesting way of showing us that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake we can make. If this story of transformation and justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true power lies not in the position we hold, but in the character we carry.